Thank you. I will try to say what we're doing and give you a couple of examples in Cambridge. Activity-based research. The basic idea is to gain more and deeper understanding of how people interact with the physical environment. A lot of work has been on work environments, office environments, but the same applies to many other environments. But in fact, work environments have been a focus. When one wants to use research methods to increase understanding, which is clearly a desirable goal, there's a spectrum. But at each end of the spectrum, you can look at case studies, observe real situations, take observational data of various kinds, and learn from real situations all the complexity and uniqueness and all the detail. Alternatively, you can build models. Models are simplified. They strip out a huge amount of detail, huge amount of data, but the idea is they get to the essence, the key, the core aspects of that situation are isolated from all the noise around them. Both are very important research methods. My impression is a lot more case study research is done in the built environment arena than modelling, but there's a role of modelling. That's what we've focused on, and I'm going to explain a little bit of why and give you two little examples. Activity in space. One's to do with buildings, geometry, objects, physical things. The other's to do with people and behaviour. Now, building simplified models of space doesn't sound too challenging. Buildings, things in buildings, parts of buildings have size, shape, and so on, and you can imagine building physical models, abstract mathematical models, and manipulating them, testing them. That probably few people would feel was stretching the bounds. But people and activities, people are unique, unpredictable. They're all different, free will, and so on. How would you expect to treat people in the same simplified, abstracted way as you might treat physical space? And a lot of people would say, well, you can't, forget it, it's nonsense, it's intangibles, don't even think about it. But I think that's being a little bit pessimistic. The thing is that when you make any buildings to be used by people, you are making assumptions about behaviour. You can't avoid it. Even when it appears you're, cranes, glass, concrete, all this sort of thing, all this construction, all this investment, all this money is based on assumptions about people, about people's behaviour. And if those assumptions are wrong, all these money, glass, concrete could be wasted or get a very poor return. I heard a head of research at BT giving a talk, and he made this interesting observation, or nice observation. The risk is in the assumptions. The bits you don't question and take for granted, those are the bits that are going to cause you problems. So behavioural assumptions are very risky when you're spending a lot of money. There's a lot of discussion this morning and in this in workplace environment about settings to promote interaction. Well, if you believe that the design of a setting, the physical layout, configuration, location of a setting can affect interaction, then you must believe that there's a connection between space and behaviour, and you must believe that you, in some sense, understand it. Otherwise, there'd be no point designing spaces to promote interaction. You've got to believe that there's a connection. But do you understand it? The first example is about how people sit at tables. A lot of spaces of interaction are informal, often cafe areas. Here's an aerial view of a cafe area. Now, supposing you wanted to understand how people use these areas, and suppose you did lots of observations, how do two people sit at a 4-seat table? You could take observations, photographic monitoring, so on. And supposing after that observational research, you find that 2/3 of the time people sit at adjacent corners of the table, and only 1/3 they sit opposite each other. You might conclude that people prefer adjacent sitting, and that you might believe that was a an indication of people's desires, and you might want to reflect that desires in your design. So you might then perhaps think of long tables, so more people sit side by side. Maybe that would be a logical inference to be drawn from that observational data. But if you step back and you look at the actual abstracted situation, people at tables, 2 people at a 4-person table, there are 12, and no more than 12 ways people can actually sit. 2 people sit at a 4-person table, and all 12 are shown there. And of those 12 ways, and there aren't any more, it doesn't matter what, it doesn't matter who the people are, this applies, everywhere. Of those 12 ways, 8 involve people sitting at adjacent corners, and 4 involve people sitting at opposite corners. So your observational data, which showed this ratio, 1/3, 2/3, would indicate people sit randomly. And to base a conclusion without, or to look at the observational data without understanding the model of the spatial possibilities, you could easily draw wrong conclusions. The model, activity space model there, reveals the impact of space on behaviour, or the constraint of space on behaviour, and would perhaps prevent you drawing false conclusions and making false design propositions. The second one, I'm lucky enough to be based in Pembroke College in Cambridge, and this is the dining hall at Pembroke College, and slightly traditional. It's all fake, but it all looks nice. The traditional image of a college in Oxford and Cambridge is the place where people from all the different departments of the university come together and mix, and it is what we've all been talking about, the space for interaction, eat together. And you'll observe that in this Pembroke College Hall, like most of them, there are 2 zones. There's the foreground zone and the background zone. And this is now moving from real world into a little model. The foreground zone is the high table. That's for the teachers and the senior people, essentially the teachers in the university. And the main hall, the larger area, is for the students. And that's the traditional pattern. And I obviously spend a certain amount of time there, and one observes the different behavioural patterns. So looking at behaviour in the main hall, people come, as I say, from all the different disciplines around the university, some large disciplines, lots of people do engineering, natural science, quite a lot do English, so on, and then you get some smaller subjects. When people sit in the main hall, they tend to arrive in sort of groups. They come probably from the department, a bunch of student friends, they get their food, they sit down together in a group. And then another group comes and they sit in a different part of the hall. The first group, we had scientists, and we got some engineers. And then more groups come, and they tend to be usually dominated by subject friendships, a bit of mixture, but generally dominated by subject friendships. And you get this sort of pattern at the end. A few people who don't seem to have any friends. You can't just join a group, it doesn't work that way, so you have to find a kind of a zone where you're out of trouble and can be inconspicuous, or try to be inconspicuous. And so the pattern of occupation is dominated by discrete groups of people who already know each other, and they try to, so far as it's possible, to keep away from other people. That's the nature of the occupation pattern. Now on the other part of the table, the high table, they come through a different entrance, people come in, and the first people who come in this little notional example, a couple of engineers, they sit at the first seats on the table. And then the next people come, they sit on the next seats. A couple of scientists come in. And then other people come in, and they always take the next seat. And eventually you get quite a lot of mixing of disciplines, because the sequence in which people arrive. And so this is the convention at high table. You take the next seat regardless who's already seated. Very different conventions in the same, the same enclosure. Now we're talking about interaction. The whole point of this environment, as in many settings designed for interaction, is how people connect. Now, in this context, I've suggested there are 2 kinds of connections. There are weak connections between people who are from the same subject area, so they probably know each other and so on. They're not going to make a lot of new discoveries from engaging with people who haven't met before. And so weak connections, there are a lot of weak connections in the main part of the hall, But then you say, well, there are also strong connections. Strong connections when you're next to somebody from a different discipline, and who knows what the outcome might be. Maybe, you know, some creative idea would emerge. And there are some strong connections, you can see. Now, in this little example, of course, every time you observe, you'll get different patterns. But in this little example, on average, each person sitting in that main part of the hall has 1.3 weak connections and 0.8 strong connections. Numbers aren't so important, but that's the pattern. If you look at the other part of the hall, the same weak and strong connections, each person on the high table has 0.8 weak connections and 3.4 strong connections. Physical proximity to somebody from a distant discipline, they might talk, they might say something interesting. That's a big difference, a factor of 4. Now, as I say, the numbers don't really matter, because every time you observe, you'll get different thing. But every time you observe, you're going to see a similar kind of pattern, and that kind of big difference you'll observe. And that big difference results from space use conventions. In both parts of the hall, you've got people from different disciplines in the same physical enclosure at the same time, but because of the space use conventions, the potential for cross-disciplinary contact is fantastically different. And a model like this, a simple model, but quantified, you don't have to worry about the exact numbers, but the pattern comes out at you, I think, more strongly through modelling than just by observation. In fact, having said that, you know, you talk to people in the hall and you point out this difference, and when you point it out, people say, oh yes, you're right, of course it's true, yes, of course that's obvious. But they've never noticed it before, and being alerted to these things, even though it may be obvious, things, you know, this is the danger of the assumptions, the things you're not aware of, you can live through these conventions and have no experience of, no awareness, and you can't exploit that knowledge. So jumping back, I argued that or suggested there are two research methods, case studies and models. I certainly wouldn't at all diminish the value of case study research, tremendously important, but I think there's a strong place for models. They can give you additional insights. Often they can obviously overlay case study data. You need data to build a model. This is my summing up. This is my summary. Why one would do activity-based modelling as opposed to just case studies. There are structures in this space and activities. You can build models, you know, sort of mathematical models, but not necessarily with numbers, with structures, relationships, ways that things interact. There are structures in both space and activities. If you ignore these structures, you are exposed to unstated and untested assumptions. The structures are there. If you're not aware of them, you're not conscious of them, you may be making assumptions and they may lead you astray. You can learn a lot about activity structures, even with simplified models. These are very simple examples, and I wouldn't pretend they're more than simple examples, but a lot of life is actually based on pretty simple models. I'm not convinced you need phenomenal complexity to understand real situations. I think simple models can go a long way, further than many people would realise. Final point is that with case studies, you can really only study existing situations. You can't get data unless there's a case study for you to go and collect the data. But with modelling, you can investigate hypothetical situations, essentially the future. If you want to innovate, you want to move into the future, you want to make changes which will have productive outcomes, you have to do modelling. Case studies are not going to be the way you can research the future. Thank you.